Welcome, everybody. I am Ruben, and you are listening to After the Master, a weekly podcast in which I talk to people primarily from the international student community who have recently earned a master's degree from globally leading programs and are now on the path to achieving their professional goals. My guests delve into their experiences and highlight their mistakes, learnings, and realizations, which I am sure will help you move closer to your career goals. I post a new episode every week, so please subscribe to receive updates. If you would like to listen to this episode, please see the description for a link to your favorite app and stick around till the end to gain as much as possible. I would love to hear from you, so please connect with me through the link in the description. In this episode, Rashmi talks about pursuing a career at a major public university or a non-profit instead of a big corporation after completing an MBA. She also discusses how working in the non-profit world can be far more rewarding in the long run, especially for international students. Rashmi holds an MBA from DePaul University, which is in the US. All right. Hi, Rashmi. How are you?
Hi, Ruben. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so happy that you could make time for this. I'm sure that your career trajectory will be very interesting and very new to many, considering some of the decisions that you've made. So to begin with, can you run through your background, educational and professional background a little bit?
Sure. My original undergrad degree is actually in computer science and engineering. And I think about 6 months after I worked at Accenture, I decided to pursue an MBA. I then applied to a lot of grad schools in the US and chose DePaul University. I wanted the experience of going to a smaller private school where I felt like, there would be catered services and help for me and not a very big school. This was the first time I was leaving my country and, my home environment. So I pursued my MBA. And then after that, I've been working at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign for about 6 years now.
I wanted to pick on a couple of points that you mentioned, right? So you had a couple of brief stints at Accenture and Infosys, like a lot of people do after completing a degree in computer science or even during as internships. But then I noticed from your LinkedIn profile that you also had a little bit of a brief stint with the UN. So
Yes.
how was that like? Where did that come from?
Yeah, throughout my life, I've been very interested in working with nonprofits and doing nonprofit work. Along with the UN, I also work with an organization called Misericordia, which is a living learning community for people with neurological diversity or neurodiverse, as we call it. Or I've also worked with other nonprofit called Lift, which is for helping people in low-income neighborhoods get jobs. And so I've always been kind of interested in the nonprofit sector. So my work with the UN was specific to a nonprofit that worked in Africa. And what they wanted is that they wanted a digital marketing intern to talk about the work they were doing, come up with a content plan and execute it, and try to help advise them on what social media platforms they should be on and stuff like that. So it was very interesting for me to learn how UN affiliated nonprofits work. What kind of work do they do in Africa? How does the funding come in? And how do you talk about yourself and what kind of work they do? So it was a huge learning experience for me to work with that UN partner nonprofit.
That's great. And before you decided to move to the US for the MBA, what was your perception like of MBAs abroad, and what were the things? What was your mindset like before applying, or when that was brewing in your mind?
Sure. Everything I knew about the US and life outside India, I think I knew from like TV. And I'd been to the US a couple of times maybe before that, maybe once or twice. And so I had seen like the touristy side and, all that stuff. And I definitely thought that's what life would be like. I would be like Rachel and like Monica on Friends running through New York City or something crazy. But so it was a huge shock for me. It was also a huge shock for me because I'd lived at home until then. And so it was my first kind of foray into the big world and learning to do everything myself. And also, the American classroom is very different from an Indian classroom. In the first few classes that I took, I think I was more disturbed by what my classmates were doing than what my professor. Professors were fine with everything that's happening. Some people are on their laptop, some people are on their phone, or the thing that bothered me the most, people would eat in class, and I would be like, what is like? There's a lot happening around me because in India there's this perception, pin drop silence, otherwise the prof will kick you out. So it was a huge, I think the first 6 months was a huge cultural learning experience for me to kind of catch up and understand and learn to communicate and do everything by myself. And then I also quickly realized that in the US, it really depends on you what you make of your education. You can do the basic minimum and just get through, or you can, really go above and beyond and join student organizations and clubs and, do internships and networking events. So very quickly, I had to learn that it's just me and I have to make all these decisions and work hard towards the things I want to get done. So very quickly, I went from, that group mentality in India where, I'll do whatever everyone else is doing to, okay, I have to do a lot of research and kind of figure out what I want to do even in my MBA concentration, what kind of classes I want to take, because there's a huge choice.
Correct.
And everything really depends on your interest. So a lot of group thinking to individual thinking and understanding that in learning how to make decisions for myself and things like that, I think were the big mountains I had to climb in the first few months in the US.
Of course. And was this idea of being involved with a nonprofit there in your mind when you stepped into the MBA, or were you kind of pressured, because of peer pressure that everybody is applying to these big companies, the Big Four and whatnot? So what were your thoughts at the time?
Yeah, in my MBA program, there was a clear delineation between folks who wanted Big Four jobs and folks who were here and didn't know what they wanted or didn't want Big Four jobs. The Big Four people, I think they hung out with themselves and, they had like their eyes on the prize from the minute they got in. When I came from Accenture, so I understood a lot of that mentality or, those goals they were setting for themselves. Mm-hmm. But I came to the MBA program because I didn't want to be in the Big Four, if that makes sense. I had lived that Accenture life and I thought, okay, this is not what I want to do.
Right.
So from the beginning, my quest was trying to understand, okay, so now what? Now you're in a business program, you don't want to work for a Big Four, and now what? Luckily, the school I had chosen was a small private school, and they were a private Catholic school in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And they did a lot of work with other Catholic nonprofits and humanitarian organizations. Mm-hmm. So the first nonprofit project I worked on was actually one that was involved in a class. So it was for a marketing course that we did. And they took us to the nonprofit and they said, here's how you're going to showcase the skills you've learned in class. You're going to do something for this nonprofit. So that was kind of my first experience using my professional skills in a nonprofit. Prior to that, my experience in nonprofits was like teaching English or, philanthropy work and stuff like that. So this was the first time I was like, oh, I can apply what I learned in class in this setting. Right. And when we would do these events or do these courses and projects, we would present to a class, we would present to people whose the impact of my work on their lives was massive. And it was just beautiful to see that and feel like, okay, this is what I'm working towards. Mm-hmm. And so the next class was a management consulting class, which I told, even though I knew I didn't want to be in the Big Four, I still was very interested in management consulting and wanted to learn how the process works and in generally interested in human behavior and things like that. Okay. So when I took the class, the project of that class was also with a nonprofit. So that was my second nonprofit experience using something that I definitely thought was like a very niche business skill, management consulting. So that's kind of how my journey with nonprofits started. And then that year, when I had the break for the summer, that's when I worked with the UN affiliated nonprofits. So it just kind of took off from there.
This is, very interesting to me because from the get-go, you, as you said, you wanted to move away from the idea of a big four. And the last time, the other day when we spoke on the phone, you mentioned that there seems to be this equation, at least, in India, and amongst many international students, that, this person has a degree in computer science, and now they have a degree, or they're working towards a degree, a master's degree in the US, which should equal to, a job at a big four, or a FANG.
Yeah.
But
Fine.
yeah, and that is, a lot of people seem to not understand that this is not, there are a lot of things outside of these big companies, right? So
Yeah.
as you mentioned that some of your courses, some of your class projects also pushed you towards the non-profit path. But what was it like? So once you were there, I'm sure at sometime after the first year, or towards the end of the first year, you're looking for internships and sort of summer jobs between both the years. So what was your experience like with finding potential employers at the time?
Yeah. There was a good amount of students in my class, in my cohort, luckily, who were also pursuing nonprofit work in very interesting ways. For example, one of my close friends, Emily, was pursuing microfinancing for female entrepreneurs and underrepresented communities. So she was
Okay.
taking a lot of finance classes, and her concentration was finance, but this is how she was looking into that world, not, in the CFA perspective, but the nonprofit perspective. So I was very lucky that I had peers who were thinking about this actively and wanted to pursue, in our minds, change in the real world. And so I was in good company to kind of understand the opportunities that were available to people like me who had business and engineering degrees and wanted to work. The next step was to find stable employment in the nonprofit world, because as you know, most of the nonprofit world depends on philanthropic donations or,
Yes.
grants and contracts and stuff like that. So we were trying to find jobs that could use our skills and would, be a stable outcome for us, but also have real world impact. So it was kind of a mental exercise to kind of look up and research and find these organizations that I could add something to, and they could add something to me, and would be interested in hiring me. So in a part of that exercise, I had really good career counselors at DePaul University. They had a huge team of 4 to 5, and depending on what you wanted to do, you would get allotted a career counselor. So because I was consistently working with nonprofits and I was not very interested in the big four or CPGs, I chose to work with the government and nonprofit oriented career counselor, and we talked a lot. And one of the ideas she gave me then was, why don't you think about public universities, because they do a lot of work that I'm interested in, and they could use, they're at the scale that they could use a lot of MBAs to kind of do the heavy lifts in strategy and thinking. And so that's where my path into, we call them R1 research universities. So that's where my path into research institutions and university life began.
Excellent. And what about, so you mentioned a lot of your peers were also interested in nonprofit. So can you give a few examples of the kind of professions that some of them, apart from your friend Emily, as you mentioned, went into? Any examples that come to your mind? Yeah.
Absolutely. A few of them work as diversity, equity, and inclusion officers in either nonprofits or even in big banks. Like, for example, one of my friends does this at US Bank. And they what they try to do is they try to increase the number of people from underrepresented backgrounds who get loans.
Okay.
Because a criteria that matches an affluent person or a socially high-standing person doesn't always, a person from an underrepresented background might not match those criteria.
Right.
So their goal is to kind of make loans and banking an equitable place. So
Okay.
a lot of my classmates are using their business skills to make the world a more equitable place. And it's always interesting to kind of talk to them and see what they're working on. And it's really interesting that, you go to school and you learn finance and accounting and you can do
Mhm.
this with it.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, you mentioned that, with the help of your counselor, you she suggested working at public universities, and that's how you got into working at UIUC. And the other day you mentioned that, once you graduated, you struggled a little bit for a while to secure full-time employment, which is why you took up an hourly paying job. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Can you talk?
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. I think, when you hear about your cousins or your friends going abroad and studying and getting jobs, it sounds very seamless in your head. You're like, of course, they went abroad, they studied, they got a job, now they make six figures and live happily ever after. That's the story you're told over and over again.
Exactly.
But a lot of grad students might identify with the other side of the story too, the panic of, approaching graduation and not having a job offer in hand.
Mm,
Especially if you're a student on F1, there are very
mm,
few companies who want to hire people and do the H1B paperwork for them.
mm,
And most of those companies are usually STEM companies, some
mm.
kind of engineering or,
Yes.
that kind of company. So
Yes.
if you're pursuing an MBA or, a non-STEM course of any sort, I'm sure it's very familiar to you that there's a little bit of a struggle to find employment and employers who are willing to hire people without work visas or
Mm,
any kind of green card or citizenship.
mm.
And a lot of job postings mention that upfront. They say, yeah, work permit required. Like you should already have this. If you don't
Yeah.
have it, you're not really interested in this. So
Yeah.
it's quite an uphill battle for international students to find employment and um, figure out while you already navigate stressful finals and interviews and networking, also this additional huge component of like work permits and work visas. So I was definitely struggling towards the end because I think in my whole like, oh, I only want to work for a nonprofit and I don't really want to work for industry type mentality, I didn't take networking and applying to jobs too seriously until it was the last semester. At this
Mhm.
point, I felt like most of my friends had already figured out where they were going after, and I was still trying to
Mm,
figure it out and interviewing at that point.
mm.
So graduation was in uh, May, and I'm still trying to navigate things in April and May. And after graduation, it like the panic set in, like, oh, I'm done with this thing and I don't have the next thing figured out. But luckily, my career counselor, she was just like a oasis of like calm and peace. And she was like, there's so many people in this boat with you, and this is just a part of life, and you just have to keep pushing through and applying and um, keep doing it over and over again until something sticks.
Yeah.
At that point, I wish I knew what I know now about applying to jobs and how to do it. But I was just a student, just coming fresh out of my MBA.
Yeah.
Luckily, I met with someone she referred me to who was at that point working in the College of Business at UIUC.
Mm-hmm.
And that person said, it's this is the summer of 2016. Sorry, and there
Okay.
was a hiring freeze everywhere. And he said, do you mind coming on as an hourly employee and we can see what happens from then? And I
Right.
didn't have a job. So I thought, okay, you know what, let's take this, let's go forward with it and see what happens.
Yeah.
So I did it. I made a little leap of faith and it definitely paid off. So I feel like a lot of graduating students, if there is a little jumping step or a stepping stone, take it and
Mm-hmm.
try it out. Don't be afraid because who knows what it might lead to.
Exactly. That's I think you definitely made the right decision. You know, a lot of people, I mean, a few people always consider the potential pay that they receive, right, as a, you know, in terms of maybe a return on investment on the MBA tuition fee, or generally they may have certain pay expectations after a certain point in their life. And uh, an MBA is a pretty much a very common point at which, you know, people want to step up and upgrade themselves.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about the kind of pay that people can
Sure.
expect if they do seek employment at a nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that employment at a nonprofit is, as you can imagine, not super competitive with employment in the big four or, CPGs and things like that.
Mhm.
But they do make up in a lot of different ways, except
Hmm.
especially if you work for a university. Um,
Okay.
you can expect to make anywhere between, I would say, between like, depending on your work experience and your skill set, of course, a lot of things will
Yeah.
vary. But I would say starting pay at most nonprofits for MBAs would probably be in the high 60s,
Okay.
and potential to, I would think that the upper limit of what you could make at a university is less than the maybe 300,000-ish level.
Wow, that's good.
To speak, yeah, yeah, it really
Mhm.
depends on what you do. Like if you're a high ranking member of a strategic team, or like that
Hmm.
advancement, business dev, marketing, there are high earning professionals on campus.
Hmm.
But for a starter job, and if you're, a fresher and you only have 1 or 2 years of work experience under your belt, I would think, somewhere in the mid 70s would be a great starting point. It
Okay.
also depends on your city. If you, uh, the pay depends on, the cost
Of
of living in the
course.
city and stuff
Of
like that.
course. Yeah.
So suppose in Champaign, Urbana, you're making 70. In Chicago, to live the same lifestyle, that the pay might be 90,
Correct.
because that
Correct.
20,000 acknowledges the cost of living. Then the other thing I want to mention is, if you're working at a university, there are a lot of other benefits that I'm not sure if people know of. For example, at UIUC, you can take any class you want on campus for free, and you can pursue an additional master's degree for free. And the
Wow.
worth of those degrees is, you every grad student knows the worth of what a master's degree in the US costs. There's also a lot of professional development opportunities because you're in a learning environment. Your
Correct.
leadership is cognizant of the fact that you have to be a lifelong learner. So at every point when I've said, hey, I need to learn this or I need to know this to do a better job, leadership is always saying, yes, we want you to learn it. Or a lot of times they themselves are sending me to trainings that cost a good amount of money.
Correct.
And on top of that, if you're employed by a public university, that also allows you benefits. I think, I maybe it was how I was perceiving life in India. I never thought about like benefits as a thing when I was
Hmm.
younger too. But now as a little more experienced in life, when you think about like, oh, okay, you need life insurance and health insurance and
Hmm.
retirement, and everyone's starting to plan for. You have to have a plan for your retirement already. So all these kind of things, if you're a government employee or a public university employee, all these kind of things really factor in. And the other thing that I rarely see people talk about, but I think is important, is quality of your life.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
the How do you feel at the end of your work day? How do you feel about the work you do, your passion for your work? I factor all these things into your paycheck.
Hmm.
Money is a hard number, but there are more things to life that make you feel good about your work life than money.
Correct.
So I would urge students to think about compensation in a holistic way and not just the end of the day paycheck. I would urge you to
Hmm.
think about
Hmm.
what benefits your employer is offering you in terms of just uh, life benefits, but also professional benefits. Are you encouraged to learn new things? What does that depend on? Because
Hmm.
in a lot of companies, professional development depends on your supervisor's choice. But in public universities or in a lot of nonprofits, professional development is just a part of your um, professional evaluation or, the learning plan they have for you.
Correct.
So I would urge students to think about your compensation in a more holistic way than just numbers.
Very rightly said. And it seems that, like the number you mentioned, maybe upper 60s to mid 70s in a place like Urbana-Champaign, and the potential to go up to 200K, 300K is not, I mean, if you think about it, it's not very different from what maybe a big corporate would also pay. And another advantage that I think a lot of people don't know about is the work visa. Like the process is a little different if you're working at a university or a non-profit, correct? And of course, these things are all available on the internet, but can you touch upon this point a little bit?
Yeah, I am not an expert, but I think I know a little from having lived it.
Yes.
So if you work in the industry jobs, you have to get what's called an H1B, and that is applied for you from your company. So it's not you're not applying; your company will apply on your behalf, and then you go into a lottery system. And I think the last time I heard, there are 400,000 applicants and 80,000 visas allotted every year, something like that.
Correct. Yeah, the number is somewhere in the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you have a STEM degree, then there is a additional benefit on your side for highly specialized degrees or something.
Okay.
So the chance, I think the last time I checked, was 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 people will arbitrarily get a chance to work and live their American dream, and 4 in 5 people won't. And it's a very scary place to be if you just think like, okay, I have 1 in 5 chances to make good on the money I've spent on this master's degree, and a chance to live this life that you've chosen for yourself.
Right.
Whereas on the university side of things, because you're a non-profit, your employer is a non-profit org, and if you're also doing any kind of specialized skills, there are different visa types for those specialized skills and employers. You're no longer in a lottery. This is more straightforward, granted more easily, and there's not as much guesswork.
Right.
In the H1B, it's your luck or whatever, and in the university life, it's not your luck. And especially if you do something a little bit more specialized, like in the tech field or in the sciences, then it gets easier and easier to secure visas.
Right.
So I think a lot of people don't know this about universities and nonprofits, that they are not vying for the same amount of seats that the industry is.
Thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of people, they don't know about this, and just a little bit of searching and talking to people would open up many doors that you thought never existed in the first place. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the kind of the third or the final part of the podcast, which is mostly about advice. All right. So firstly, if you were to tell yourself, if you were to talk to yourself when you were applying to master's programs or even before that, is there any advice that you would give yourself, like something that stands out?
Yes, I think I must have applied to, let's say, 150 jobs when I was in my MBA.
Okay.
And since then, I must have applied to after my first employment, must have applied to 10 or 15 jobs maybe in the last 6 years. And I have never not gotten a call back in the last 6 years. And I think the big change, or the thing I wish I knew before, I've learned by serving on search committees. Every time I've served on a search committee and helped an organization hire someone, I've learned something from it. And I wish I could just go back and tell my MBA self all those lessons. But the big ones are, there are usually 3 stages in every interview process, no matter who's hiring. The first stage is online resume review, where the search committee is looking at your papers that you've submitted to the job. They don't meet you immediately.
Correct.
And in that stage, what they're trying to understand is, do you have the skills to do this job? Very straightforward.
Right.
So you should have a resume and a cover letter. That's your standard. And every time you want to apply for a job, please edit your resume and cover letter to exactly answer what the job description is asking for. So what I do is I read the job description 2 or 3 times. I bring out a notebook and a pencil, and I write down all the things that they're asking for. What are the hard skills and the professional characteristics? Hard skills could be something like coding, designing, UX, UI, and characteristics could be something like organizational management or leadership skills, detail orientedness, communication, that kind of stuff. Make a list of all the things they're asking for. Then look at your resume and think back and say, okay, where have I used these skills? And directly address their needs. So when they're looking at the job description and your resume should be the answer to that question of, can you do this?
Got it.
Nobody cares if you've done other things. In that situation, you're looking at like hundreds of resumes, right? So if you're vague about like, if they're asking, do you have leadership skills? And I'm like, partially managed a team of 6 or something. No, be like exhibited leadership skills by managing a team of 6 people and encourage them to, blank, something like that. Like just answer the questions they're asking. Because you don't want to overwhelm them with not pertinent information. And in the second phase, it's usually the team that's meeting you and they want to understand, are you going to fit into this team? At this part, you should be very comfortable knowing and understanding what you're going to say about yourself. Who are you? Why are you here? And also, a thing that I've learned lately is to humanize yourself, because they're talking to a lot of people and everyone gives the right answers if they've come to this point. So what about you is unique, and how are you going to fit into this team? So make it a little bit more fun and engaging. Be authentic and honest. Be funny if you can. Show them you have a personality, a sense of humor, that you're a team player, because that's what the team is trying to understand. Each person across the table is thinking, if we hire this person, what will it feel like to work with them? So bring out the personality, make yourself, if you're not charming, make yourself appear charming. No, I'm kidding. Be charming, be open, be ready to engage in conversations beyond your resume. Know how to talk about yourself, have an elevator pitch ready. If you can, the first question usually is always, tell us about yourself, and, humanize yourself a little bit. And so then the third part of almost all interview processes is to talk to leadership and communicate. Again, now both things combined. I can do this job and I can be a good person to work with. So think in that mindset. I have a Google Doc that is, I think, the top 50 questions you get asked in an interview from Muse or some other online resource. And I have answered all my questions already. So every time I'm going to a job interview, I just copy that doc and think, okay, now with this job in mind, how would I answer this question? I type out everything. I don't try to memorize, because I think if you read out loud, or if you're going by rote memorization, it looks not authentic. But at least I have talking points and I'm not meandering. I'm trying to stay on track and answer questions appropriately. So I would urge students to be prepared with some base documents, a resume, a cover letter, references, and your basic answers to the standard questions. And at every chance, curate them, edit them, and make it appropriate to what they're asking, and know how to talk about yourself. I wish I knew these things when I was younger. When I was younger, I just had one resume, one cover letter, and I was just changing, the name of the job and the employer and blasting it out.
Correct.
And
Rookie
then
mistake.
Yes, rookie mistakes, and not perceiving why I wasn't getting callbacks. Or, when someone would say, tell me about yourself, I would just say, oh, this is my undergrad and my grad, and I studied this and I like this, and here I am. But that's everybody. Everybody has done these things at this stage. So what about me makes me unique, or what about me is worth being a part of their team? Like, how am I going to appeal to them as humans and say, hey, think of me beyond my paper resume and my phone voice, or, my Zoom video. I'm more than that.
Correct. Very, very relevant points that you said. I mean, some of these things cannot be emphasized enough, and very relevant, regardless of whichever profession, whichever line of work, whatever degree you have. Applying for jobs is the process is very similar in most cases.
I think the other missing part in my job search as a grad student was I didn't understand the power of networking. And I was trying to do this, numbers approach, apply to 100 jobs, maybe 20 will call you back and 10 will interview you. You'll get one, some math I had in my brain. But now I know that if I want a job, the first thing I do, for example, let's say I want a job at University of Washington. The first thing I'll do is I'll open LinkedIn and see, okay, do I know anyone through second or tertiary networks who works at the University of Washington? I'll
Yes.
talk to them and I'll say, tell me about the work culture. Tell me, what does this institution value? Do you know the team? What is the team value? What's the team like? What is the culture like? Try to understand and get some insights about where you're interviewing and what they want. I also do a lot of informational interviews, which is, for example, if I'm applying to a job as a teacher, to keep it simple, I would talk to other teachers and say, hey, what do you say in your interview? What are you most valued for at work? What is the mistake that you've made that you wish you didn't make in the interview or at the job? So try to learn a lot about your job. So I've come down to an approach of, instead of playing the whole numbers game of applying to 100 jobs, at this point in my career, I apply to maybe 2 jobs a year or something like that. And I'm very focused on understanding and learning and, being very prepared. And I think that's the answer to that's the reason behind the success rate at interviews now, is that I'm much more cognizant and understanding of what they're looking for and how to answer their questions.
Right.
I rarely apply to a job anymore where if I haven't networked or if I haven't gotten an answer back from putting feelers, I don't interview there anymore, because I feel like, okay, if you're not willing to talk about your work or your employer, maybe
Something
I don't want to
it's
be
a red flag. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish I could tell this to my younger self, is that just don't apply to jobs randomly. Be purposeful, have a plan, talk to people, because you never know who knows who and how that all works out, or how that can impact your life.
Correct.
So apply to a qualitative amount, do your homework, and talk to people. Maybe it's the international student in me, but I was very apprehensive about talking to people. I quite didn't know how to communicate and talk, or talk about myself, or the American quality of small talk and chit chat was not very. I was not very used to it. So over the years, I've learned a lot that you should talk to people. You learn a lot from talking to people, more than you can learn from any job website or job.
Absolutely.
So now when I apply to a job, I definitely try to talk to someone on that team. I try to talk to someone in that org or that unit or whatever, that parent company. I talk to other people who are doing that job. And it definitely gives me a lot of insight. When I answer some questions in the interview, I can see the interviewers' eyes light up, because they're like, bingo, she hit it. And I usually know to say that or think that because I've talked to someone who's doing that job.
Exactly.
Which from the outside, you can't imagine what is going on or what are the challenges or what are they facing right now. But if you talk to a few people, you learn those things. So those would be my 2 big advices to Rashmi of the past. Be purposeful and learn to talk.
Yeah, you're very right in that networking part, because a lot of people that I spoke to for the podcast and also otherwise, it seems to be a fact that referrals and knowing somebody from within the company that or organization that you are interviewing with or you've applied to can make a lot of difference, right? And so it's kind of an extension of that is whether you have whether somebody within your team has referred a potential candidate to you, and then what goes through your mind when you are interviewing them or looking through their resume. Like, people assume that if you are referred to, you're automatically bumped up in the list of candidates, and your chances of getting a call back are much higher. So do you have any thoughts on that, any experiences?
Yeah, Ruben, I would say that yes, if someone I know has referred someone to me on a search committee or as a part of a search, when you see the references that they're listed, if it's someone familiar to you, you definitely feel like some amount of surety that yes, this person is bringing their authentic skills. They're not just saying, yes, I know how to do the job. And beyond that, it also if they're working in a similar job or a similar company or the same company, that also offers some amount of safety net for the search committee, thinking like, okay, this is a familiar candidate. So I would definitely say yes. But, there are also a lot of rules in the US about nepotism and
Of course.
how hiring can happen. So there's a lot of HR policies. For example, if I'm searching, if I'm on a job search committee and you, Ruben, somebody I know applies, I have to recluse myself. I have to say, okay, I can't interview Ruben because I have a personal connection with him.
Of course, yeah.
Or I can't talk to you if you came to me and said, Rashmi, I would like to talk to you about this job. I saw that you're on the search committee. I can't talk to you about it because, those cross the HR guidelines. But what you can do is you can talk to my teammate.
Yeah.
Or, somebody else in the org. And that definitely is helpful to you and to me, right? In a lot of ways. So I would recommend, like, a lot of companies have these HR guidelines about how to hire and, what the people on the search can and can't do. But go beyond that. Think a little bit, be imaginative and think like, okay, now I can't talk to this person, they're on the search, but what can I do? And most usually, if you're Indian, you probably know at least 100 other engineers and management folks in the US, and they know 100 others. So your network is quite large. And reach out to folks through your network and try to talk because it is very important.
Correct. Yeah. So another question on the advice side, is there a piece of advice that you consider to be some of the best advice you've received? It can be, regarding your career or otherwise.
Yeah. I think the best piece of advice I received was from actually my prof in management consulting. He always said this thing. In the beginning, it seemed very simple. And I'm an engineer, so I thought I was smarter than everyone. But over the span of the past few years, I have taken it much more seriously to heart. And I felt like it's expanded my mind. He always used to say, be curious. Don't think that don't think that, don't assume anything. Always ask questions and learn and have an open mind towards learning. And I feel like that's been instrumental because so many times, you tell yourself, oh, this is not for me, or like everyone else is doing this, or I already tried and that didn't work. But if you're a little bit open-minded, whether it's type of jobs or type of companies, your job role, if you're a little curious, it expands your ability to try new things and learn from them.
Right.
So I would say in India, we have this huge perception, like you go abroad, you live in New York City, and then you go to a big fancy school and you wear a suit every day, then you get a 6-figure job and you live in a white picket fence home with a lawn out front. But be curious to what else exists in the world and how you could be a part of it and try to learn from the people around you. That's one of the best parts of being an immigrant in a new country, is that you could ask questions and learn a lot of new information without the perception that you should already know it. You're not from here, so how will you know anything? So I found a lot of comfort, or like a lot of satisfaction from being able to humble myself and ask questions and be open to learning, and sometimes admit that, okay, I do know, so I'm going to ask. And in India, I had this huge mindset that, okay, if you ask, they'll think you're an idiot or you don't know. But here I'm much more okay with asking questions and learning new things. And I feel like that's really expanded who I am professionally and personally.
That's amazing. And this is almost exactly what someone else also told me. The person I interviewed for the first episode.
Australian.
No, this was also from, she studied at Arizona State University.
Okay.
So the management program at Arizona State, and even one of her professors told her something on, very similar lines about, continuing to learn and trying to stay curious. So that just, struck my mind, and it was pretty little mind blowing that it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, because I feel like the world puts this pressure on you to be an all-knowing person, like when someone asks you a question, you rarely want to say, oh, I don't know. You want to answer it.
Yeah.
And it feels like your worth as a person depends on how many questions you can answer. But I feel like there's more value in sometimes saying, oh, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? Or what can I learn from you?
Yeah, and this is actually, I was going through LinkedIn on the other day, and There was a post by one of Microsoft's top recruiters, and I think that also mentioned something like, don't try to be a know-it-all, try to be somebody who wants to know, wants to learn. And
Right.
that presents a much better image, regardless of who you're talking to or interviewing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of companies kind of test you on that. In the interview process, they ask this question, what would you do differently if you're a part of this team? Or, what would you change about how we do things? And I feel like a lot of people just jump into an answer, but how do you know what you would do differently if you've never walked in their shoes?
Of course, yeah. Common sense,
Yeah, you
yeah,
can give a
that's
lot of
logical.
random answers like, oh, I would change this, I would change that, but maybe they've already tried that and that doesn't work. Or maybe in their scenario, that's not a realistic expectation. So it's always good to be like, I haven't walked in your shoes, so I don't know exactly how things would pan out, but some ideas I had that might work is these ones. So it helps to be curious and humble.
Of course. Right. So, a lot of times we see that some of these professions are very male dominated, and especially in the corporate world. And although things are changing rapidly, uh, especially in the US and in the West, what was your experience like throughout this process as a woman? Is there something that stands out?
I think you're right, Ruben. In a lot of leadership positions or strategic positions, it's usually men who, for lack of better words, wear the pants in those situations. And in an MBA class or in the business world, you can see this division quite clearly in the ratios of men and women in the class, or what kind of paychecks for jobs men get versus what kind of paychecks and jobs women get. While there is, like you said, a lot of positive movement right now, there's still a lot of ground to cover in that direction. And in most companies, you will see that low and middle level employees are usually women, and high level employees are usually men, and in the US, white men. And so there is this, the glass ceilings that you have to break here and there and keep moving forward. And I think the big thing that you have to learn is to understand what is your strategy for dealing with this, because this is prevalent. And what are you going to do about it? Because in companies or in workplace environments, there's very little space for having a discussion that makes anyone feel defensive. If you want to bring your ideas and your presence to the table, how do you do it? And what's your unique way of navigating these situations? I think in everybody's career, especially women or immigrants, there'll be a few times in your life where you feel unsure of how you handle the situation, or something that makes you feel like, oh, I wish I knew how to do that better, or I wish there was a different outcome for this. The thing I think we have to learn from these situations is you have to talk to other people who are in the same boat as you, and see, okay, oh, this happened. How did you navigate? I'm sure it happens to everyone at some point. I'm sure every grad student or every working professional from India and the US, women or just Indian people, you might have experienced a situation where you felt like, oh, I was very underprepared and I didn't know how to handle that. Or I wish my idea got chosen, or I wish I said my idea louder, or the other person was wrong and I wish I put my foot down and said something. The thing that you have to learn is that how do you say no, and how do you deal with confrontation or disagreement in a very polite and positive way.
Okay.
And that's something that's a little difficult for me, especially in the beginning. I'm a huge people pleaser, and I'm very I have a very positive attitude at work. I'm always saying yes and trying to do things, and I hate saying no. So sometimes when people are wrong or people are underestimating your skills, you have to be able to stand up for yourself, but in a way that's professional and polite. So I think a lot of times I've learned to kind of, make a joke out of it. I'll address it when people are underestimating. I'll be like, oh yeah, people always say you're so young and you look like one of those students, so how will we listen to you? But I've done work and strategized and, worked with projects with budgets of X amount of dollars. So I'm fine. I got this. And when you just address it like that in the room, people are like, oh, I also thought this, but now she's calling me out, but like in a jokey way.
Right,
and so
yeah.
it leaves very...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it leaves very little place to do it again once you get called out, and especially with a sense of humor. So in interviews, sometimes I've been asked like, oh, like, you're quite young and you're applying for this leadership role. Tell us about your leadership experience. It's quite
Okay.
obvious from my resume, all the things I've done. So the fact that you're asking me already, to me, I'm like, oh, you felt the need to re-qualify, like, rehash this.
Hmm.
This is a doubt in your head. So then also sometimes I just like I make a joke out of it. I smile and I say, yeah, I get this question a lot because people think because I'm
Hmm.
young and I'm a woman of color and an immigrant, maybe I don't know how, but I've had enough education and experience to definitely know how. And then I
Okay.
laugh. So you have to laugh. What else can you?
But
Like,
have there been any situations in which like you kind of shake it off in a positive manner, but the other person doesn't respond in a manner that you expected?
yes, I think sometimes people feel very uncomfortable, especially if they
Okay.
feel defensive. Then the first response is to say, no, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, or that's not what I meant. But
Oh,
and
okay.
they know what they
Right.
meant or what
Yeah.
they said.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then you have to be willing to kind of think like, okay, like, understand that if you back them up against a wall, it only goes downhill. They become more defensive and the situation might turn
Hmm.
unsavory of sorts. So you have to know when to put your foot on the gas pedal and when to lift up a little bit and
Yeah.
bring,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, you have to survive in this organization and with this team. And while they might not have the best assessment of you and your capabilities, you have to thrive in this environment, and
Hmm.
it never helps to make anyone uncomfortable or be uncomfortable yourself.
Hmm.
So I feel like you have to have a good amount of tact and charm and humor to kind of navigate these otherwise tough and awkward and difficult situations, and still be perceived as a friendly member of the team. You might have heard the stereotype of like the angry women of color. Well, we're angry because everyone's underestimating us and undermining our
Hmm.
decisions. Like it does
Hmm.
make one angry. So I think you have to kind of put on your armor every day and say, okay, a few things are going to happen here
Hmm.
and there where I'm uncomfortable or, I'm not happy with how I'm being perceived. But here are my here are the tools in my arsenal: my education, my professional experience, my success rate with projects,
Hmm.
my sense of self and humor and charm. Like these are the only things I can use to navigate these situations. So sometimes when I'm prepared, I have good answers and,
Hmm.
I can come back and say, there you go. Sometimes when I get caught off guard and I go home and I think, I should have said this or I should have said that, or I could have said something else, or I didn't say anything sometimes. And these are all
Hmm.
learning lessons. And I feel like I surprisingly have lived in the US for 8 years now. The time has flown. But even then, once in a while, something happens that I'm like, oh no, I should have put my foot down or said something else. And those are all learning moments. And I hope, in 40, 50 years, maybe women don't have to face this or immigrants don't have to face this. But for now, you have to learn to deal with it and you have to have a way of coming out of it.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's kind of upsetting to hear that, even, um, somebody with your resume in front of them and they know everything about you, they kind of challenge your decisions and your objectives to join a company or join a team or whatever.
Yeah, I think the worst thing is to be underprepared or think that this will never happen. Like even in India, you would face a lot of this if you didn't go to like a IIT. Like
Huh.
IITians or like people of some institutions are perceived differently from other people, or age. Age is a huge factor, I think, in how people perceive a young
Hmm.
professional. So
Hmm.
if you're a younger professional and you haven't gone to like a premium or premier institute, or any other of these,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe your communication skills are not as fluent or something, there is a good chance that people will make comments or undermine your abilities. But you might be
Yeah.
really good
Yeah.
at your job or really able to carry out the task. So you have to be willing to bat for yourself and always be cognizant that this is your work environment. So you have to live here for the next foreseeable future. So you have to have a way of navigating this. I feel like wherever you go, there will be some challenges, and it really depends on the person. Like I've been the person who gets cowed down by it and intimidated and keeps mum. But I've
Hmm.
also been the person like who
Hmm.
learned to speak up for myself and come out of it making everyone in the room feel comfortable and not like the awkward silence of, oh my God,
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things they teach you in an MBA. So if
Oh,
you're thinking
really?
of getting one, you're going, yeah, there is a lot of like in your management consulting or your HR or organizational behavior, there is a
Mm.
lot of addressing of like disagreements in the workplace or sometimes even agreements
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace. So I think it's one of the, I tell people that like going into my MBA, I thought I learned finance and accounting, but coming out of my MBA, I think I learned to be a better people manager.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of MBA programs focus on communication in some way or the other, whether it's a class or whatever. But I didn't know that they kind of also cover some of these aspects, of a workplace. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, so I'd like to end each episode with one question, which is, when would you consider yourself to be successful?
Ruben, this is a really good question. And I think, especially as Indians, we're taught that success is very important, and there are a lot of yardsticks for success. Your parents might measure it one way, society measures it in a different way, and friends, and there's money, and there's cars, and iPhones, and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I would say success probably to me is feeling like every day when I wake up and I do something, it's for a purpose. I want to be a purposeful human being and I want to understand my place in this world and the impact that I have on it. And I'm very lucky that I feel like I have that right now. And I feel very at peace with that sense of, that pride or accomplishment, whatever we want to call it, that every day when I do something, it's for a reason and something good happens in the world because of what I do. And um, I like knowing that my work furthers life-saving cancer medicine or research that's stopping or curing Alzheimer's at some point, or technology that is being used to map black holes that NASA uses every day. It feels very fulfilling to me. In this world where every day something new and something flashier comes by and you might want to aspire for it, I try to stay grounded and try to think to myself about what's actually important, healthiness of mind, body, and like that sense of positive impact on the world. I hope it doesn't sound too boastful, but I feel like I'm happy where I am and I'm happy with the impact I've had so far. So in a way, I feel successful now.
Wow.
And I hope I do a lot more things and I expand and grow, but
Yeah.
I think I'm in the right path. And for a long time in my life, I felt very pulled by, expectations of the world around me and my own expectations of life because our generation with the exposure to social media and like flashiness of reality television and consumerism, it feels very like it's never ending. You could always want the next thing, and there's something always on the horizon that you wish you had. But when I'm feeling mindful and feeling purposeful, I feel like in some way I've made it.
That's amazing, and that's a really, really nice answer to the question. And I'm really happy that you kind of are on the right path, and you have this sense of success in your career, which is amazing. And many people tell me that my career goal is, I need this dream job in working at Google or Apple is
Amazon.
yeah. So this is my dream job, or I want to become the CEO of this company, and all of that is fine. All of that is fine, but all of them, most of them are, say, in the 21 to 23, 24 age group, and everybody that I've asked this question to, what is your definition of success, or when would you consider yourself to be successful, answers are drastically different, and there is no alignment whatsoever. So yeah, that I find very, very interesting, and one of the reasons why I ask this question is so that whoever watching this, if you're young, you probably get to build your ideas also from listening to others.
Yeah, I hope so because I think being a community where education and higher education and professional success is very valued, and your worth is defined by those things in a lot of ways in the Indian society. What have you studied? What college have you gone to? How much money do you make, especially compared to the next person, you know? I know so-and-so's son who studied in this university and is now living in California and like driving this car and all that kind of stuff. It puts a lot of pressure on young people, and it kind of tries to manipulate with your idea of who you should be and what's important. But you have to know for yourself that what makes you feel good and what's important for you. Because otherwise, no matter what you achieve, somebody else will come and say something else, you know. Even
Of
now
course.
at this point in my professional life where I'm serving on search committees and I'm giving other people advice, when I go home, my parents still ask me like, oh, you know, when will you work in Google? You're so smart. Why don't you think about a career in Amazon? And so in those moments, and you know, for somebody else, it's something else.
Correct.
Everybody gets some other question or some other
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah.
So at some point, you have to learn what's important to you, because you're the one who's, you know, turning up every day at 9 a.m. and you have to do a good job and it has to feel good to you. And when you look back on your life, you have to be able to make sense of all of it and say, I did that for this reason and it made me feel like this. And so I think that's very important for young people to know and keep in mind that only you should define your success and you should be sure of what that is.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. All right, Rashmi, I think this was wonderful. Once again, thank you so much. And I'm sure this would help a lot of people, especially, you know, your advice about how to approach the interview process or applying to jobs and a lot more. So yeah, thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast. And I'm really happy I got to share my story in the STEM and FANG dominated world of Indian grad students.
Yeah.
When I started out, I definitely felt like, you know, I'm not the typical grad student or the typical US immigrant. And so when I found my path, I felt very happy. And it took we were talking about, it took a little bit of a struggle. And even now, once in a while, I have to figure out something. But in the end, I feel really good about what I've achieved. And hopefully sharing my journey and my struggles and my learning outcomes is helpful to other folks who feel like the Big Four or FANG is not their end game and they're feeling disillusioned about grad school or life abroad. I just want to put it on the map that there are other things you can do with your life. And so I'm happy I got this chance to speak.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Ruben.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did, please share this within your network and please subscribe to stay tuned. Thank you.